glad you stopped in today. I'm going to be talking with my friend Robert Henslin, and we're going to be discussing relevance and faith and culture. So let's welcome Rob to the conversation.
Hey Cheryl, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you today, Rob?
Very good. It's good to be with you.
I think we met you about 9 years ago now when my husband Rich started writing and publishing his fiction books.
That's right. Hard to believe it's been that long.
You came highly recommended as a graphic artist.
Good. That's good to hear. I want to hear those kind of things are happening. The viral marketing is a wonderful thing, and we've developed a great friendship as a result of that.
We have. In fact, you did a cover piece for my children's book as well, and we've referred you a number of times to other people. So it's been great to just keep following your work.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
So you've got a pretty interesting life story. And today we're going to be talking about relevance, and we've had some conversations along this line in the past.
Yes, we have.
How would you like to begin talking about relevance in your own life?
For me, as I've thought back over history, especially the last decade or so, through difficult challenges on the medical front, leukemia relapse that came back after almost 20 years in remission, and the fallout that happened after that, the challenges to my faith that happened through that, and now we're in the time of COVID and isolation and a lot of stress and a lot of concern about what the future holds. And I've been wrestling with the whole notion of what can I do as a Christian to be relevant? Where's my strong suit? What are the best cards I can play in terms of being authentic and trying to be the light, the lamppost on the hill? And for me, Cheryl, it's come down to understanding that what the Lord has done for me is given me a story. He's given me something to tap into that I've been through, where I've seen him work even in the darkest times. And that's been a tremendous realization over the last several years. That meant after my transplant, when I was at the clinic doing follow-up care, to just be mindful that the whole room was filled with people just like me who were all going through a similar struggle, and we were all at different stages of that game. And it reminds me of a young couple that came in. Clearly, the young lady was a new patient. She and her husband were there clearly for their first visit in the clinic. I knew nothing about them, but from across the room, in a packed waiting room, I watched them approach the counter at the clinic to talk to the receptionist with sort of a deer in the headlights look on their face. They were clearly caught in the bright headlights of cancer and stunned to know best how to move forward. And I was sort of paying attention to them, but also just reading the sports section of the paper, waiting for my own name to be called, watching how they interacted. And I watched the clerk there gesture to them to go have a seat and their name would be called. There were no seats except two in the room that were right next to me. And my backpack was on one of those seats. I quickly moved the backpack, motioned to the couple, over here, there's two over here. So they went, oh, thank you. They came over and sat down. And in one of those times that can only be described as a divine appointment, a God encounter, or what have you, this young couple and I struck up a very brief conversation in just the few moments that we had. I learned that she was recently diagnosed with the same type of leukemia that I was originally diagnosed with back in 1989, and had just completed the transplant because of a relapse of that same leukemia. And that gave us an instant connection. And she was saying, now wait a minute, you've already had your transplant? You look so good. And I was at about day 60 or day 70 post-transplant. not feeling like I look good at all, and certainly not feeling good by any measure. Still just trying to endure and
Mm-hmm.
get through. But we had an amazing connection where this woman said, "Okay, you have acute lymphoblastic leukemia. That's what I have. I was just diagnosed a few weeks ago, and this is my first day to the clinic." And there was a moment there where she said, in a very serious tone, it's like her whole countenance changed. She looked me in the eye and she said, "Can I beat this?" And for a moment, I didn't know what to say.
Mm.
And I sort of stared back, probably in headlights of my own at the time. I stared back at this young gal and I said, I can't tell you that. I can't answer that question. But what I can tell you is that you can fight. Um, when I first started my journey back in 1989, when the leukemia was first diagnosed, I thought it was just going to steamroll me. And that was going to be the end of it. Married 6 months, diagnosed with cancer,
Mm-hmm.
good try, we'll talk to you later. Lights out. That wasn't the case. And that's where the Lord began to really work in my life, brought me to this point now, 20 some years later, where I'm having this encounter with this young lady. And what I'm able to do is tap into the fact that the Lord taught me how to fight and
Mm.
gave me the strength to fight. So I was able to, with 100% confidence, share that truth with this young gal whose eyes were just as wide as saucers. And she's looking for any bit of stability and something firm that she can hang her hat on in that moment. And I said, "I know you can fight." I didn't think I could, but God gave me the strength to fight. And that's the only reason I'm still here now, still fighting. So that's a prime example of this notion of relevance. If I didn't have that journey and I happened to meet this woman in the supermarket, at the library, standing in line to buy movie tickets, there would not be the ability in
Right.
that moment to be relevant with my faith with her had I not been through that hardship
Mm-hmm.
some years prior, and then in the weeks and months leading up to my time meeting her at Stanford. So that's a classic example of where I know I need to reside in my heart and in my spirit. I need to just let the Lord remind me what I've been through and tap into that story, that personal story, to have an impact in the age of COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. You were still dealing, excuse me, with that question yourself, weren't you?
I sure was.
Can I beat this?
Can I beat this? Very true. And I was only, I believe I was fewer than 100 days post transplant. And after your discharge, day 100 or day plus 100 is like the next milestone that they want you to push for. The first essentially 3 months post transplant, because that's when you'll notice complications or not, graft
Mm-hmm.
versus host disease symptoms or not. So that 90-day, 100-day window is really a critical time. And I was probably in the middle of that when I met this young couple. So it was an amazing time. And our meeting, Cheryl, that day was only 4 or 5 minutes long. It was just heart to heart for 2 or 3 minutes. I don't even know you. You don't know me. But we had this instant connection. And then, "Robert, we're ready to see you." And so I said, "Okay, I have to go, and I'll probably see you again because I'm here all the time and you will be too." The interesting thing is I never saw that woman again or her husband. Never again. It was a one-time,
Uh-huh.
uh, some would say perchance meeting. I don't believe in perchance or coincidence at all anymore.
Yeah.
That was absolutely the meeting we were meant to have in that moment, and I will
Yeah.
always be thankful for it.
You were you were very aware, weren't you, that that it was very much a divine appointment, and that yeah, this was a moment. Your response was just an opportunity. It was everything.
It really was. And those things have happened on more than one occasion. There were other occasions at Stanford in that same clinic where I would be having a really bad day. And I might have been throwing a little pity party for myself, and I've invited all my friends in to, celebrate with me. What a terrible moment this is. Another day in the clinic for 8 hours, getting IVs of Lord knows what, blood products or potassium or whatever happened to be low that needed to be filled up again. And I was sitting in a reclining chair, just having a bad day. And it was all about me that day. And I thought, woe is me. This fella's next to me in the recliner. We're both tapped into our IVs. He leans over out of thin air and just says, how do you get through this? And there's another moment of clarity where it's like, okay, Rob, like, get over it. There are other people in the room too that are struggling just as much as you are. It's not all about you. And I leaned back to the guy and said, you know what? I just try to have faith every day that God has me in his grip and he's not letting go. And as I'm telling the man these words, I'm thinking to myself, what's happening here? Like this is not something I would normally just say, hey buddy, let me tell you about the Lord. I'm not a street corner preacher, witnessy kind of guy. Mm-hmm. But it's just in that moment, we made eye contact, and he just needed his own sense of reassurance. Like, how am I going to get through this? So he happens to tap the guy who's thinks he's having a really bad day when really things could be far worse, But in that moment, it was about, no. I think the Lord is saying, no, off of you onto him, get your mind out of your own head and look at this guy who needs you to respond in a way that will be helpful, that'll encourage the guy. So I think the struggle is kind of ongoing in that regard. It's very easy when you have a bad day to think that it's a really bad day. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a reminder that you have a story to share and to be vigilant and to be sensitive to those folks around you and their circumstances so you can actually do some good.
Right. As we talk about relevance, I'm thinking that so many people do not have answers. They're in these dilemmas like cancer, and there is no pat solution for them.
Right.
And those seem to be the times when people are really, really open. And was there a struggle on your part? I'm sure there had to be with two major incidences of cancer. Was there a real struggle on your part to really come to grips with why God would allow this kind of thing to overtake your life?
Yeah, I think there was, but the way it worked itself out was more of a surprise to me than anything. I remember, I think it was my first night at City of Hope down in Doherty, California, in Southern California, back in 1989. Like I mentioned before, I'd been married for 6 months prior to the diagnosis, and then that came right out of thin air. So on my first night at City of Hope, I'm in bed. My wife had just been in for a visit on her way home from work, and she called from home and said, I'm just struggling with this because you're supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be there. And we had a tough conversation on the phone. It was very, very emotional and very difficult as we were both coming to terms with the reality of our situation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when I hung up the phone, I kind of sat there and had sort of a Job-esque moment, where the story of Job is one where a man has seemingly everything going for him, his life is good, and suddenly finds himself surrounded by the ashes of everything he once knew. It was just gone. And that's how I felt that night at City of Hope. It's like, wait a minute. We had all these hopes and dreams. We were just newly married just 6 months ago. So all of a sudden, in that moment, that night, I was faced with the question, what do you really believe? Because in high school, as a believer, our high school group would do mission trips down to Mexico, and we'd take food and other resources down in a bus and spend a weekend just living up on kids in an orphanage. And we all felt like that was a good outworking of our faith, and that was a way we could demonstrate our faith, that we were trying to reach out and help others. But there was no other challenge really beyond that that was of any magnitude until that night. After a week in the hospital where they're trying to determine why I'm so sick, to now being transferred out to a cancer center, understanding I'm now a cancer patient, and everybody knew that. I was in denial about that myself. I didn't even want to come out of my room. But everyone down the hall at the nurse's station knew that the guy in room 216 was a leukemia patient. And so in that moment, that night, after hanging up with my wife, I had to think, what do I really believe? Now that the flames have been turned up, what do you really believe? This isn't an orphanage run to Mexico, where the biggest challenge is getting the big school bus up the hill without it sliding out of gear and back down the hill. This is more significant. This is your whole life, and they're going to start
really
treating.
Personal overnight.
Exactly. It's much more personal, much more relevant, much more mission critical than anything prior. So that was the first real challenge. And then I guess that night I just decided I believed and pursued the next 6 weeks of treatment with that sort of mindset, like, God still has me in his grip. He's not going to let me go. He's promised to be with us during these times, during the times of hardship and in blessing. This is one of those times where I'm just having to reach out in total trust. But the outworking of that over time, I didn't realize that I had a lot of maybe resentment inside about why me. I never felt that when I was going through treatment. I sort of felt like, why not me? Because things just sort of happen.
Yeah.
But I think on a deeper layer, there was some resentment that I carried and wasn't even aware of until the relapse happened 19 and a half years later. And I realized then, over the course of events, that there was still baggage, there was still some junk in my trunk about that. And it was impacting not just my life, but my wife, my family, and was cause for some real introspection and some real deep soul searching. Once I got a handle on that and realized what that was about, then I could focus again on the recovery following the transplant. But there were some rough years right in the middle of the relapse and the treatment and all of that, where those things sort of bubbled to the surface in more clarity than I'd ever experienced in the past. So it was a kind of a rude awakening and a difficult time, but I'm thankful for having gone through that.
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
Well, and we have a powerful God, and he's worked some amazing things in my life in that regard, so that my faith has been strengthened and encouraged. I mean, I still have moments, pardon me, still have moments where, I wonder, God, are you aware of this? I'm looking up going, you know about this, right? This isn't coming as a surprise to you. Like God isn't up in heaven going, man, I didn't see that coming at all. Sorry, Rob. He knows full well what's going on. And so those type of experiences have helped me further ground myself in my faith. And I think I'm able to face these new challenges as they come along with a little bit more understanding, a little bit more maturity perhaps than in years past. So
it was a very faith-forming experience for you. You were forced to really develop a theology about trials and suffering, weren't you?
Absolutely.
That's what crisis does to us. It really makes us look at our faith under a microscope and see, is this worth hanging on to? Is there any substance here? Um,
Yeah.
it's intense examination when we're faced with what you went through, and after 19 years, you probably figured, I'm okay, you know, I
Absolutely.
got
That's
through this.
absolutely the case.
And
Yeah.
19 years, every anniversary probably was just one of those things. Wow, I really did beat this. And then to have to deal with it a second time was, I'm
It
sure.
was the shock of a lifetime.
Yeah.
It was the shock of a lifetime. When my doctor called that day, I had just been to see her 2 hours prior
Hmm.
on just a routine visit. It had been a while. I needed to talk to her about some things. And she said, "Hey, before you leave, could you stop downstairs and just have them draw some labs so we have a current labs on file for you, kind of as a new baseline moving forward?" Pardon me. I said, "Sure." Had the labs drawn. I go back to my office, which was in the backyard of our house. I had a dedicated office space. The doctor calls the house line wanting to speak to me. My wife was home, and she said, "Well, he's not home, but he's at work. You can reach him at this number," basically in the backyard.
Hmm.
So she knew something was up. So when the doctor is on the phone with me, my office door opens, and here's my wife ducking her head in and kind of paying attention. Like, what does she want? You know? And I hear the doctor saying, "How are you feeling, Rob?" I said, "Well, I feel great. Didn't we just talk? You're probably not calling to talk. What's going on?" And I'm getting this warm flush running through me, like here comes something.
Yeah.
And my wife's looking peeking in the door, like, "What's going on?" The doctor says, I think your relapse, I think your leukemia has come back. I think you've had a relapse." And after that, I don't remember much of what she said, just a few words. Um, New doctor, oncologist, meeting, admit you to the hospital, things like that. And I looked at my wife and I just went thumbs down. That's all I could do. I was on the phone and I just went. And I remember her face going, "Oh no, like not again, not again."
Wow.
And so that's how the news was broken. And within 2 days, or the next day, I was meeting with my brand new oncologist at a Kaiser facility in Santa Clara. And 2 days later, I was admitting to a med surg unit to begin chemotherapy. So instant change of your world in just 2 days. Had to shut down my business, alert all my clients what was going on, get them files that they needed to be able to keep moving forward with their
Mhm.
marketing programs and whatnot. So a little bit of a bumpy road, a lot of turbulence.
Right.
But
Right.
but I think the second time around, because we had that experience in 20 years prior, that was actually a blessing. Um, in the current moment, because it's like, okay, we've done this before. This is probably going to be more intense because now they're talking about a bone marrow transplant. I didn't know much about that at the time, but I feel like that part of it was a blessing from God to say, "Look, I've got you now, just like I had you back then." So
As a nudge to people that are watching this,
yeah,
what would you say to them about how to encourage somebody that they know that's going through some kind of crisis like this? What was most helpful for you from people?
probably more the encouragement that they were there with me. I was not alone. It's very easy to feel so alone when it's just you in your hospital bed or
Did
at
people
home.
did people come and like sit with you when you had chemo and things like that, or just sit in the waiting room when they couldn't be with you?
Yes, people were making themselves very visible and very available. Um, had a dear friend that I would call sometimes at 2 in the morning from my bed at Kaiser long before the transplant even happened. This is just getting back into chemotherapy. When I wasn't coping well at all, I knew he was a night owl and he would be up, and we would text back and forth, or we would talk on the phone, and he would remind me about Jeremiah 29:11. "I
Hmm.
know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord." And he would pump that into my brain, and try to fill my head with verses and scripture that mattered in the moment. And then other people wrote letters, people that I didn't even know, because he was a local radio host, and was able to share, a Christian radio station, was able to share my story with his audience. Those people ended up writing me letters, sending them to the radio station, and then folks at the radio station put those cards and letters into a bundle, mailed it to me.
Wow.
And my wife at the time walks into my room at Kaiser Hospital and said, "This came in the mail for you." And it was this massive package, and I had no idea what was inside. But I opened it up and spilled them all out over the bedspread, or over the blanket on my bed. And here's cards and letters from people I have no idea where they are, who they are, but they're all writing me saying, "Hey, your friend told us about you on this radio show," or "He told us about you when he was leading worship at the church, and we just want you to know we're praying for you, and we're expecting the Lord to do great things. We're banging on the gates of heaven on your behalf." So for people that are struggling, when you know those what people are going through in your life, your friends, your family members, just being there and making contact with them and letting them know that they're not alone, because it's so easy to feel that way. Because people are living their life while you're getting treatment, while you're on an MRI table, or you're getting an infusion, and you're just in a chair for 6 hours with your thoughts. It's really nice to know that you actually aren't alone, that you're on people's radar. That was a huge blessing in my life, both times I had to battle the cancer.
This has been so good today, Rob. It's been good for us to hear your story and how God met you in that place, and how your faith has been strengthened because of the testing, but also for those of us that walk through those times with people around us, even people that we don't know that well, that God just somehow brings into our life in some random circumstance, and yet there's always opportunity there.
Yeah, there really is.
For living out our faith in a really relevant way.
You bet. Yeah, it's been great to have this opportunity to talk with you about it. I appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks so much for stopping by.
You bet. Thank you, Cheryl.
Great conversation with Rob today. He'll be back in a few weeks to tell us about his new book that he's just published for children. In the meantime, be sure that you stay current with the channel, and the best way for you to do that is to click the subscribe button so that you're notified each week when I'll be posting. Thanks.